It was 3 hours before the ice storm that Craig Hollister stood up in the town council meeting and called Walt Jennings outdated. The metal folding chairs scraped against the linoleum. The furnace clanked in the corner, fighting the January cold. Burnt coffee smell hung in the air, thick as the silence after Craig spoke. "We need forward-thinking leadership," Craig said, tapping his tablet. "Walt Jennings' methods are antiquated. His farm's yield data proves it." The council members nodded. Diane, Walt's wife, sat beside Craig, staring at a color-coded folder in her lap. She didn't look up, didn't look at Walt. Walt gripped the armrest of his chair, said nothing, drove home alone. Now, 3 hours later, his headlights cut through the ice storm on Route 9. Wind howled through the truck's cracked vent. The heater rattled. Cold metal steering wheel bit through his work gloves. Hazard lights ahead. Black Mercedes in the ditch, driver's door open. Walt should have kept driving, but he pulled over, stepped into the storm. The man slumped at the wheel, reeked of whiskey. It was Craig Hollister. Craig's head lolled. His eyes found Walt's face, struggled to focus. "Don't," he mumbled. "Don't tell Diane." Walt didn't answer. He grabbed Craig under the arms and hauled him out of the Mercedes. Ice pellets stung Walt's face. The ditch was slick with frozen mud, and Craig's dress shoes couldn't find purchase. He kept sliding, mumbling something about a meeting, about how he was fine, about Diane. Walt assumed he meant Craig's wife. Some woman in the city, probably. Rich men always had wives who didn't know where they were at midnight. He half-carried, half-dragged Craig to his pickup. The truck's cab smelled like diesel and old coffee from the thermos wedged in the cup holder. Walt shoved Craig into the passenger seat. Craig's head hit the window, and he groaned, but didn't wake. Walt stood there a moment, breath fogging in the cold. The Mercedes sat crooked in the ditch, hazard lights blinking like a dying heartbeat. He should call a tow truck, should call the sheriff. Instead, he climbed into his truck and drove toward town. The road was empty. Black ice gleamed under his headlights. The radio crackled with a storm warning, but Walt didn't need a weatherman to tell him it was bad. He'd lived through 47 winters in this county. He knew when the air turned mean. Craig stirred, mumbling again. "She'll be mad," he said. His words slurred together. Don't tell her." Walt's jaw tightened. He kept his eyes on the road. At the stoplight on Main Street, he pulled out his phone and called Diane. It rang 4 times before she answered. "Walt?" Her voice was flat. No warmth, just his name. "I'm bringing your boss home," Walt said. "Found him in a ditch on Route 9. He's drunk." Silence on the other end. Not the shocked kind, the careful kind. "Is he okay?" she finally asked. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Thank God you were there." "He'll live," Walt said. "Take him to his place on Ridgewood," Diane said. "I'll text you the address." The line went dead. Walt stared at the phone. The stoplight turned green. Behind him, a car honked. He drove on. Craig's house was a new build on the edge of town. All glass and sharp angles, the kind of place that didn't belong in farm country. Walt pulled into the circular driveway. Motion sensor lights flooded the yard. He got out, walked around to the passenger side. Craig was awake now, sort of. His eyes were open, but they weren't tracking right. "Come on," Walt said. Craig let himself be pulled from the truck. He stumbled on the front steps and Walt caught him. Up close, Craig smelled like expensive whiskey and cologne. Not the drugstore kind, the kind that came in a box. Walt found the door unlocked. Inside, everything was white. White walls, white furniture, white tile that clicked under their boots. Craig collapsed onto a leather couch that probably cost more than Walt's truck. "Don't tell Diane," Craig mumbled again, his eyes closing. Walt stood there, looking down at him. The man who'd called him outdated 3 hours ago. The man who'd made Diane sit silent while he tore Walt down in front of the whole council. He should have left him in the ditch. But that wasn't who Walt was. He turned off the lights, made sure Craig was breathing steady, and left. The motion sensors lit his way back to the truck. Ice had started to coat the windshield again. Walt sat in the cab, engine idling, heat blowing through the vents. He pulled out his phone and stared at it. Diane hadn't called back, hadn't texted to ask if Walt made it home safe. She'd known Craig was out tonight. She'd known exactly where to send Walt. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. The dashboard clock read 1:47 a.m. The farm would need checking. Pipes could freeze in weather like this. He had a load of feed coming at 6, and in 3 months his loan was due. April 15th, the same loan Craig's firm handled. Walt put the truck in gear and drove home. The farmhouse was dark when he pulled in. Diane's car sat in the driveway, covered in a thin layer of ice. The porch light was off. She hadn't left it on for him. He walked through the kitchen without turning on the lights. The smell of cold coffee lingered from that morning. Diane's coat hung on the hook by the door. It smelled like something floral, something new. Walt stood there in the dark, listening to the wind test the windows. Upstairs, the bedroom door was closed. No light showed underneath. He sat down at the kitchen table, pulled off his gloves. His hands were red from the cold, rough from 47 years of dirt and work. He thought about Craig's words, "Don't tell Diane," and he thought about his wife's voice on the phone, flat, careful. Something was wrong, but he didn't know what. By morning, the whole town knew. Walt walked into Mosley's feed mill just after 6. The grain auger whined overhead, sifting corn into the hopper. Diesel fumes mixed with the sweet dust smell of cracked feed. The wood plank floor creaked under his boots. Hank Mosley stood at the counter pouring coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. He didn't ask, just poured. 2 sugars, no cream, the way Walt had taken it for 40 years. "Heard you pulled Craig Hollister out of a ditch last night," Hank said. He slid 1 mug across the worn counter. "Good man." 3 farmers stood by the bulletin board, pretending to read the grain prices. They glanced at Walt, nodded. One of them, Ed Briggs, lifted his coffee in a small salute. Walt wrapped his hands around the mug. The heat felt good. "Anyone would have done it," he said. Hank leaned on the counter, his forearms thick as fence posts. He was 71, same as Walt, but built like he could still throw hay bales. "Maybe," he said, "but not everyone would have done it for a man who called him outdated in front of the whole council." Walt said nothing. Hank lowered his voice. The auger's whine covered their words. "That man's bought 3 farms in this county in the last year, Walt. Every one of them behind on payments. You see a pattern?" Walt's jaw tightened. He took a sip of coffee. It was bitter, strong, the way feed mill coffee always was. "Morrison Place sold for 40% below market," Hank continued. "The Schaefer farm, same thing. And old Gene Tidwell's 80 acres? Craig bought it for cash, flipped it 6 months later for double." Hank's eyes were steady. Someone's telling him when folks are desperate. The auger shut off. In the sudden quiet, Walt could hear the other farmers shifting their weight, the scrape of boots on wood. "I don't know what you're saying, Hank." "I'm saying be careful." Hank straightened up. "That's all." Walt finished his coffee, set the mug down. "I've got feed coming in." "It's already loaded," Hank said. "Check your truck." Walt didn't go straight home. He drove past Hollister Ag Finance on Main Street. The office sat above the hardware store, 2nd floor, glass walls. The lights were on, even though it was barely 7 in the morning. He could see Diane's desk from the street. She was there, bent over her color-coded files. Always color-coded. Blue for active loans, red for past due, green for approved. Craig's office was dark. Walt kept driving. At noon, Craig showed up at the farm. Walt was in the barn workshop, checking the seed planter. Grease on his hands, the smell of motor oil thick in the cold air. He heard the car door slam. Expensive sound, heavy and solid. Craig walked into the barn like he owned it. Clean suit, no tie. His face was pale, and his eyes were red, but he moved with that city boy confidence. The kind that didn't belong in a barn. "Walt," he said, "we need to talk." Walt wiped his hands on a rag, said nothing. Craig pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. Inside was a promissory note. Walt recognized his own signature at the bottom. $40,000, part of the farm loan, due in April. "I wanted to thank you," Craig said, "for last night. You didn't have to do that." "No," Walt said. "I didn't." Craig smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "I'm tearing this up," he said. He held the note between his hands. "Consider it gratitude. 40,000, forgiven." Walt stared at him. "Why?" "Because you saved my life." Craig tore the note slowly, deliberately. The sound was loud in the quiet barn. He let the pieces fall to the concrete floor. "We're square now." Behind Craig, the barn door opened. Diane stepped inside. She must have come straight from the office. She still wore her work clothes, heels clicking on the concrete. Her eyes were red. She looked at the torn paper on the floor, looked at Craig, then at Walt, and she started crying, not loud, just tears running down her face. Walt moved toward her. Dan, thank you," she said to Craig. Her voice broke. "Thank you so much." Craig nodded, put a hand on her shoulder. "It's the right thing to do." Walt stood there, grease still on his hands, watching his wife cry over another man's mercy. Craig turned to leave, stopped at the door. "Oh, and Walt, let's keep this between us. I don't want people thinking I play favorites. Then he was gone. Diane wiped her eyes. I have to get back to work, she said. She didn't look at Walt, just turned and followed Craig out. Walt heard both cars start, heard them drive away. He stood in the barn, staring at the torn pieces of paper on the floor. $40,000, gone. Just like that. He should have felt relief. Instead, he felt trapped. 2 days later, Hank called. Come down to the mill, he said. Got something you need to see. Walt drove into town. The February sky was the color of old cement. Snow had melted off the roads, leaving behind salt stains and mud. The air smelled like thaw, wet earth and last year's corn stalks rotting in the fields. Inside the feed mill, Hank had papers spread across the counter. County records, property deeds. Looked into those farms I mentioned, Hank said. He tapped one sheet. Morrison Place, Craig bought it last March. Here's the timeline. Morrison's loan came due in February. He tried to refinance, got denied. 3 weeks later, Craig shows up with a cash offer, 40% below appraisal. Walt studied the paper. The numbers were clear. Schaefer Farm, same pattern, Hank continued. Loan trouble in the fall. Craig buys in November, flips it this January. He looked up at Walt. Gene Tidwell's place? Loan issues in June. Craig owns it by August. How'd Craig know they were desperate? Walt asked. Hank pulled out another sheet. That's the question, isn't it? He slid it across the counter. Look at the loan officer on all 3 files. Walt read the name. His stomach dropped. Hollister Ag Finance, office manager Diane Jennings. Someone's feeding him information, Hank said quietly. Someone who sees the files before anyone else does. The auger started up overhead. The whine filled the space between them. Walt's hands were flat on the counter. He could feel the grain dust under his palms, gritty and fine. Could be coincidence, he said. Could be. Hank didn't sound convinced. But I've known you 30 years, Walt, and I've known Diane almost as long. Just be careful. Walt folded the papers, put them in his coat pocket. Appreciate it. Outside, the wind had picked up. It smelled like more snow coming. That night, Walt waited until Diane came home from work. She walked in at 7:30, later than usual. She smelled like the office, printer toner and stale air, and something else. Something floral and expensive, not her perfume. She'd worn the same drugstore brand for 8 years. Long day? Walt asked. He was sitting at the kitchen table, coffee mug in front of him. Cold now. Tax season, she said. She hung her coat on the hook. Craig's got me processing extensions. She moved through the kitchen without looking at him, opened the fridge, closed it, opened the cabinet. Diane, Walt said. She stopped, her back to him. Why didn't you defend me at the council meeting? Silence. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, wind rattled the windows. She turned around. Her face was tired. I didn't want to make it worse. Worse than him calling me outdated in front of the whole town? He didn't mean it like that. How did he mean it? She looked away. You don't understand how business works, Walt. Craig's trying to modernize the county's agricultural sector. It's not personal. Felt personal. Well, it wasn't. She grabbed her purse from the counter. I'm going to take a bath. She started toward the stairs. You're working late a lot these days, Walt said. She paused, didn't turn around. It's tax season. You said that already. Because it's true. She looked back at him then. Her eyes were hard. I'm tired, Walt. Can we not do this tonight? She went upstairs. He heard the bathroom door close, the water start running. Walt sat at the table. He pulled the county records from his pocket, unfolded them, read them again in the dim kitchen light. 3 farms, 3 desperate families. 3 times Craig Hollister knew exactly when to strike, and Diane had processed every single loan. He thought about Craig's words in the barn. Let's keep this between us. He thought about Diane crying. Not relief, something else. Guilt. Walt stood up, walked to the coat hook by the door. Diane's coat hung there, still damp from the evening air. He shouldn't, but he did. He checked the pockets, found a business card, Craig Hollister's. On the back, written in Craig's handwriting, Thursday, 8 p.m., usual place. Today was Thursday. Diane had come home at 7:30. Walt put the card back, hung the coat exactly how she'd left it. Upstairs, the water shut off. He heard her moving around, getting ready for bed. He walked to the window, looked out at the dark fields. 47 years he'd worked this land. 47 years of dirt under his nails and hope in his chest. His wife smelled like another man's cologne, and in 2 months his loan was due. The loan Craig's firm controlled, the same firm where Diane saw every file, every number, every desperate farmer before anyone else did. Walt's reflection stared back at him in the dark glass. For the first time in 8 years, he wondered if his wife was coming back at all. The letter came 3 weeks later. Walt pulled it from the mailbox on a gray March morning. County seal in the corner, official letterhead, notice of permit delay, spring planting authorization. He read it standing in the driveway. Cold drizzle soaked through his jacket. The paper said his planting permit needed additional review. Soil runoff concerns, environmental assessment required. Estimated delay, 3 weeks. 3 weeks meant missing the planting window. Missing the window meant no crop meant no income. No income meant default. Walt walked inside. The kitchen smelled like burnt toast. Diane had already left for work. Her coffee mug sat in the sink, lipstick stain on the rim. He called the county office, got transferred twice, finally reached a clerk named Susan who'd gone to school with his daughter. "I don't understand it either, Mr. Jennings," she said. Her voice was apologetic. "Your soil management has always been exemplary, but the request came from the top. Someone flagged your property for review." "Who?" "I can't say, but—" She lowered her voice. "The recommendation came through Hollister Ag Finance. They said they had concerns about loan collateral." Walt thanked her. Hung up, he sat at the kitchen table. Rain tapped against the windows. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator's hum and the drip of the leaky faucet he'd been meaning to fix for 6 months. Craig was using county bureaucracy to strangle him, and there wasn't a damn thing Walt could do about it. That afternoon, Walt drove to the feed mill. He needed to think, and thinking was easier with Hank's coffee and the smell of grain dust. The mill was busy. Farmers lined up at the counter buying seed for spring planting. Everyone but Walt. Hank saw him come in, poured coffee without asking. Walt stood at the bulletin board, not really reading. Notices for equipment sales. A lost dog. Someone selling laying hens. Behind him, he heard Lyle Dermot's voice. The bank manager, talking to Hank in that low tone men used when they didn't want to be overheard but wanted to be heard. "Craig's got Jennings' loan tied up tighter than a drum," Lyle said. "Consolidated the whole package under his firm. Walt won't be able to refinance anywhere else now, not without Craig's signature." Walt's hand tightened on his coffee mug. "That legal?" Hank asked. "Legal as Sunday," Lyle sighed. "Smart, too. Craig forgives $40,000, makes himself look generous. But in the fine print, he consolidates everything else. Now Walt owes him the other $260,000, and Craig's the only one who can modify the terms. What happens in April? Craig calls it due, Walt can't pay, farm goes to auction." Lyle's voice was grim. "I've seen it 3 times this year already. Same pattern every time." Walt turned around. Lyle saw him. His face went pale. "Walt, I didn't know you were—" "It's fine," Walt said. His voice was steady, calm, the kind of calm that came from somewhere deep and cold. "Appreciate the information." He set his coffee mug on the counter, walked out. Behind him he heard Hank say something, heard Lyle apologize. Walt got in his truck, sat there in the parking lot. Rain streaked down the windshield. The feed mill's sign swayed in the wind, metal creaking. 40 years of work, gone because he'd saved a man's life. He didn't go home. He drove to Hollister Ag Finance instead, parked across the street, sat in his truck, engine idling, watching the second-floor windows. Diane's desk was visible through the glass. She was on the phone, nodding, writing something down. Her face was serious, professional. Craig's office was next to hers. Door closed, but Walt could see him through the interior window. Talking to someone, laughing. Walt watched for 20 minutes. At 4:30, Craig stood up, grabbed his jacket, said something to Diane. She smiled. Not the tired smile she gave Walt, a real one. Craig left through the back stairs. 30 seconds later, Diane followed. Walt waited 5 minutes, then he followed too. Craig's Range Rover was parked behind the Pines Motel on the edge of town. The cheap place. The one with hourly rates and a flickering neon sign. Diane's Honda was 3 spaces down. Walt sat in his truck at the far end of the lot. Rain hammered the roof, the wipers scraped across the windshield, squeaking. He watched the door to room 7. 47 years he'd worked this land. Buried his first wife, raised his daughter, built something solid and real, and Diane was in that room with the man trying to take it all away. Walt's phone buzzed. Text from Diane. "Working late. Don't wait up." He stared at the message. Then he started the truck and drove home. The house was dark when he pulled in. He walked through the kitchen without turning on lights, sat at the table in the dark. Listen to the rain. Listen to the silence. At 9 o'clock, he heard Diane's car pull in, heard her come through the door. "Walt," she called. "Here," he said. She jumped. "God, you scared me. Why are you sitting in the dark?" He didn't answer. She turned on the light, squinted at him. "Are you okay? Where were you?" "Work. I told you." She set her purse on the counter. "Craig had me processing a huge stack of loan modifications. We ordered Chinese food and worked through it." "You smell like cigarettes," Walt said. She touched her hair. "Craig smokes. It's gross. I told him to quit." Walt stood up, walked to the window, looked out at nothing. "I got a letter today," he said. "County's delaying my planting permit." "Oh." Her voice was careful. "Did they say why?" "Soil runoff concerns. Recommendation came from Craig's office." Silence behind him. "I'm sure it's just procedure," she finally said. Walt turned around. "Is it?" She met his eyes. "What are you asking me, Walt?" "I'm asking if you're helping him." Her face went hard. "Helping him what?" "Destroy me." "That's ridiculous." She grabbed her purse. "I'm not having this conversation. You're paranoid." "Am I?" Walt's voice was still calm. Too calm. "Hank showed me the county records. Morrison, Schaefer, Tidwell. Every farm Craig bought, you processed the loan. That's my job. Is sleeping with him part of your job?" The words hung between them like smoke. Diane's face went white, then red. "How dare you!" "I saw your car, at the Pines Motel, room 7. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "We were working," she said. Her voice shook. "Craig rented the room because his office was being painted. We needed quiet to focus." "You're lying." "I'm not." She was crying now. Real tears or fake, Walt couldn't tell anymore. "We're close, Walt. He's my boss, he's my friend. But it's not what you think." "What do I think?" "That I'm some kind of—" She stopped, wiped her eyes. "I've been faithful to you. I've worked my ass off to help keep this farm afloat, and this is how you thank me? By accusing me?" Walt said nothing. She grabbed her coat. "I'm going to my sister's. Don't call me." She left. The door slammed. Her car started, tires spitting gravel as she backed out. Walt stood in the kitchen, alone. The refrigerator hummed, the faucet dripped. Outside, rain turned to sleet, tapping against the windows like fingernails. He sat back down at the table, put his head in his hands. 40 years of dirt under his nails, 8 years of marriage, 67 years of trying to do the right thing, and all of it was slipping away because he'd pulled a drunk man from a ditch on a January night. Walt had never felt so tired in his life. He thought about his first wife, Emma, how she'd died of cancer 20 years ago, and he'd shut down after. Pushed everyone away, even Sarah, how he'd married Diane not because he loved her, but because he couldn't stand being alone. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe loneliness had made him stupid. Or maybe he just trusted the wrong person with a pen and a smile. The sleet came down harder, the house creaked in the wind, and Walt sat there in the dark, wondering how a man could lose everything by doing the right thing. Diane didn't come home that night, or the next. Walt worked. That's what he did when the world fell apart. He worked. He spent 2 days fixing Ed Briggs' tractor, the old International Harvester that Ed had been nursing along since Carter was president. The engine seized up every spring, and Ed didn't have the money for a real mechanic. Walt drove over with his tools, spent the afternoon in Ed's barn, hands black with grease, the smell of diesel and old metal thick in the air. The tractor's engine block was cracked, should have been replaced years ago, but Walt patched it with what Ed had, some sealant, a prayer, and 40 years of knowing how to make broken things run a little longer. "What do I owe you?" Ed asked when Walt finally got the engine turning over. The sound was rough but steady. Not pretty, but it'd work. "Nothing," Walt said. He wiped his hands on a rag. "Walt, neighbors help neighbors," Walt said. "That's how it works." Ed nodded slowly. He was 74, a widower, living alone on 80 acres he could barely manage. His hands shook when he handed Walt a bottle of water. "How's your loan situation coming?" Ed asked. Word traveled fast in a small county. "Working on it," Walt said. Ed studied him. "My grandson's a lawyer, down in Springfield. Does agricultural law. If you ever need help, Walt, you just ask." Walt thanked him, drove home as the sun set. The house was still empty. Diane's coffee mug still sat in the sink, lipstick stain fading. Walt washed it, put it away, made himself dinner, scrambled eggs and toast, ate standing at the counter. The silence was heavy, the kind that made you notice every sound, The refrigerator's hum, the clock ticking, the wind testing the windows. His phone sat on the table. No messages, no calls. He thought about calling Sarah, his daughter, the one he'd pushed away after Emma died, the one who'd tried to reach out a dozen times over the years, and he'd kept her at arm's length because grief made him hard. She'd called 2 weeks ago. He'd let it go to voicemail. "Dad, I heard about the loan. If you need anything, call me, please." He'd deleted it. Pride was a stupid thing, but it was all he had left. The next morning, Walt walked out to the back 40, the place where he'd been testing soil since 1978, where he kept his records, jars lined up on shelves in the old equipment shed, each one labeled by hand with the date and field coordinates. 47 years of data, nitrogen levels, pH, moisture content, the kind of information that took a lifetime to gather, the kind that told you exactly what the land needed, when it needed it, and how much. He stood in the shed, looking at the jars, hundreds of them, his handwriting on every label. This was his legacy, not money, not property, knowledge, passed down from his father, refined by his own work, meant to be given to the next generation. Except Sarah wasn't interested in farming. She'd gone to college, become a paralegal, moved to the city, and Diane had never cared about the land, just the income it produced. Walt picked up one of the jars. 2019, the year he'd rotated into soybeans. Good year, the soil had been perfect. He set it back on the shelf. Outside, a crow called. The wind smelled like rain coming. March was always like this, not quite winter, not quite spring, just cold and waiting. That afternoon his phone rang. Sarah. Walt stared at it, let it ring 3 times, then answered. "Dad?" Her voice was cautious, like she expected him to hang up. "Hey, sweetheart," he said. Silence on the other end. Then, "You called me sweetheart." "Yeah. You haven't called me that since Mom died." Walt closed his eyes. "I know." Another pause. "Dad, what's wrong?" Everything, he wanted to say. "My wife's cheating on me with the man trying to take my farm. I saved his life and he's destroying mine. I'm 67 years old and I don't know how to fight anymore." Instead, he said, "I'm in trouble." "The loan?" "Yeah." "I can help," Sarah said. Her voice was stronger now, certain. "Dad, let me help you." "I don't need charity." "It's not charity, it's family." She took a breath. "I've been tracking Craig Hollister's deals. I'm working on a class action case. 12 families he's screwed over in the last 2 years. Your situation fits the pattern. I can build a case, but I need you to trust me." Walt sat down on the porch steps. The wood was cold and damp. "I pushed you away," he said quietly. "After your mother died, I was wrong." "Dad, let me finish." He looked out at the fields, bare ground, waiting for seed. "I was a hard man to live with. Your mother softened me. When she died, I forgot how to be anything else. I'm sorry." Sarah's voice broke. "I'm coming home." "No, you don't have to." "I'm coming home," she said firmly. "Tomorrow. We're going to fix this together." She hung up before he could argue. Walt sat there on the porch. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of wet earth and last year's corn stalks. For the first time in 3 weeks, something in his chest loosened. He wasn't alone. That night, Diane called. "I'm staying at my sister's a few more days," she said. Her voice was flat, distant. "Okay," Walt said. "Are you going to apologize?" "For what?" "For accusing me of something I didn't do." Walt was quiet. Then, "I saw your car at the motel, Diane. And I told you why." "You're lying." She hung up. Walt set the phone down, walked to the window, looked out at the dark fields. Somewhere out there, Craig Hollister was sleeping in his glass house, thinking he'd won. Somewhere out there, Diane was lying to her sister the way she'd been lying to him. And somewhere out there, Sarah was packing a bag, getting ready to come home and fight for a father who'd spent 20 years pushing her away. Walt pressed his hand against the cold glass. He'd saved Craig Hollister's life, and Craig had responded by trying to take everything Walt had ever built. But Walt wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The attack came through the town council. Walt heard about it from Reverend Opal Tate. She called on a Tuesday morning, voice tight with concern. "Walt, you need to know what Craig's saying." She paused. "He told the council your soil data is unreliable, said you've been using outdated methods, that your numbers don't match county standards." Walt stood in his kitchen, phone pressed to his ear. Outside, the March sky was gray, mud season. The fields were too wet to work, too cold to plant. "He's saying you're too old to manage the farm properly," Opal continued. I'm sorry, Walt. I thought you should hear it from a friend. Walt thanked her, hung up, too old, outdated, unreliable, the same words Craig had used at the January council meeting. But now he was backing them up with lies about Walt's work. 47 years of meticulous record-keeping, dismissed as the confused scribblings of an old man. Walt sat down at the kitchen table. His hands were shaking, not from age, from rage. An hour later, Hank called. "Get down to the mill," Hank said. "Now, found something you need to see." Walt drove into town. The roads were slick with mud. Rain spattered his windshield. The smell of wet pavement and diesel exhaust filled the truck cab. When he pulled into the feedlot, Hank was standing by a black Range Rover, Craig's, abandoned near the grain bins, driver's door hanging open. "Craig flew to Chicago this morning," Hank said. "Emergency meeting with his bosses, left his truck here overnight, was going to have it towed." He looked at Walt. "But I looked in the bed first." Walt walked around to the back, looked in. His stomach dropped. Soil sample jars, dozens of them, all labeled in Walt's handwriting. Years of data. Stolen from his equipment shed. Walt's hands gripped the truck's edge. The metal was cold and wet. He could smell the dirt in those jars. His dirt. His work. "He's been using your data," Hank said quietly. "That's how he knew which farms to target. Soil quality, yield potential, water rights. You had it all documented, and he stole it." Walt picked up one jar. March 2022. The Morrison Farm. Northfield. High nitrogen. Good drainage. Prime land. Morrison had lost his farm 6 months later. "How long has he had these?" Walt asked. "Don't know, but look at the dates." Hank pointed. "Goes back 5 years, before he even moved here." Walt's jaw tightened. "Diane." "Yeah." Hank's voice was grim. "She's the only one with access to your place. And she works for him." Walt set the jar back in the truck bed. His mind was racing. The stolen data, the insider information on failing loans, the motel room meetings. Diane hadn't just been sleeping with Craig. She'd been helping him destroy their neighbors. "What are you going to do?" Hank asked. Walt looked at his friend. 71 years old, Vietnam vet, the kind of man who'd pulled Walt out of dark places before. "I'm going to do something he won't expect," Walt said. "What's that?" "Something that doesn't involve lawyers or courts or waiting for justice." Walt's voice was steady, cold. "I'm going to tell the truth." Hank studied him, then nodded. "Feed mill's got the biggest bulletin board in the county." "I know. Post something there, everyone knows by noon." "I know." Hank pulled out his phone, started taking pictures of the jars, the labels, Walt's handwriting. "You'll need proof." "Yeah, and you'll need a witness." Hank looked up. "I'm your witness." Walt felt his throat tighten. "You don't have to." "The hell I don't." Hank's voice was hard. "We didn't leave men behind in Vietnam. I'm sure as hell not starting now in Iowa." Walt nodded. Couldn't speak. They spent 20 minutes photographing everything. Each jar, each label, the truck's license plate, the location. When they finished, Hank said, "Your daughter's a paralegal, right?" "Yeah." "You called her yet?" "She's coming home tomorrow." "Good." Hank closed the truck bed. "Because Craig's got power, money, lawyers. You're going to need someone who knows how to fight dirty." Walt looked at the Range Rover, at the evidence of Craig's arrogance sitting right there in the open. The man hadn't even bothered to hide it. He'd underestimated Walt, thought he was just another old farmer, too tired, too beaten down to fight back. Craig was wrong. Walt pulled out his phone, looked at the photos, years of his work, stolen, used to destroy people. He thought about Morrison, Schaefer, Tidwell, 12 families Sarah had mentioned, good people, desperate people, targeted because they'd trusted a man in a suit with a tablet and a smile, and Walt had saved that man's life. "Craig thinks I'm outdated," Walt said. "Thinks I don't understand how the modern world works." "You gonna prove him wrong?" Hank asked. Walt's eyes were hard. "I'm gonna prove him right. Because the old way, the way where a man's word meant something, where neighbors looked out for each other, that way still matters. And I'm gonna make sure this whole county remembers it." He got in his truck, started the engine. Tomorrow, Sarah would arrive. Tomorrow, they'd build a case. But tonight, Walt had work to do. Walt didn't sleep that night. He sat in his barn workshop, surrounded by 47 years of work, the smell of motor oil and old wood, the sound of rain on the metal roof, steady and relentless. On the workbench in front of him sat 5 soil jars, the ones Hank had let him take from Craig's truck before they locked it back up. Evidence. Proof. His own handwriting staring back at him. Walt picked up the jar labeled Morrison, Northfield, March 2022. He remembered the day he'd collected that sample. Cold morning. Morrison had asked him to take a look, worried about drainage issues. Walt had spent 2 hours walking the field, taking samples, making notes. He'd given Morrison the results for free, told him the soil was perfect, prime farmland, just needed better tile drainage. 6 months later, Craig bought the farm for 40% below market value. Because Craig had known exactly what that land was worth. Because Walt had told him, through Diane. Walt set the jar down. His hands were shaking. He thought about the 12 families Sarah had mentioned. 12 farms, 12 sets of soil samples stolen from this shed, 12 families destroyed because Walt had been meticulous, because he'd kept records, because he'd trusted his wife. The rain drummed harder. Walt stood up, walked to the door, looked out at the dark fields. He'd spent his whole life doing the right thing, helping neighbors, saving drunk men from ditches, being the kind of man his father had taught him to be. And where had it gotten him? His wife was sleeping with another man. His farm was about to be foreclosed. His daughter had needed him for 20 years, and he'd pushed her away because grief made him hard. Maybe Craig was right. Maybe he was outdated. Maybe the old ways didn't work anymore. Maybe kindness was just weakness dressed up in overalls. Walt's jaw tightened. He could walk away, sell the farm before Craig took it, move to town, get a small place, live on Social Security and what little savings he had left. Let Craig win. Nobody would blame him. He was 67. He'd earn rest. But then he thought about Morrison, about Schaefer and Tidwell, and the 9 other families whose names he didn't even know yet, about Ed Briggs, barely holding on to his 80 acres, one bad season away from being Craig's next target. If Walt walked away, Craig would keep destroying people. If Walt stayed silent, the lies would stand. Everyone would believe Walt's soil data was unreliable, his life's work dismissed as the confusion of an old man, and Diane would keep sitting in that office, feeding Craig information, helping him ruin their neighbors. Walt closed his eyes. He heard his first wife's voice. Emma, 20 years dead, but still clear as morning. Integrity's all we've got, Walt. Money comes and goes. Land changes hands. But how you treat people, that's forever. She'd said that the week before she died. Lying in that hospital bed, tubes and machines keeping her alive a few more days. She'd looked at him with those clear blue eyes and said, "Don't you dare become hard after I'm gone. The world needs soft men, strong, but soft." He'd failed her. After she died, he'd shut down, built walls, pushed Sarah away, married Diane not because he loved her, but because loneliness was worse than settling, and now he was paying for it. Walt opened his eyes, looked at the jars on the workbench. He could destroy Craig. He had the evidence. He had Sarah coming home with legal knowledge. He had Hank as a witness. He could burn Craig's reputation to the ground, expose Diane's betrayal, make sure everyone knew the truth. But it would cost him everything. The farm would still be lost. Legal battles took time, and his loan was due in 5 weeks. Sarah would see him at his worst, broken and desperate. The whole county would know his wife had cheated on him, made a fool of him. His humiliation would be public, complete, permanent. Walt sat back down at the workbench, put his head in his hands. 47 years of work, gone. Because he'd saved a man's life. Was dignity worth it? Was standing up worth losing everything? The rain pattered on the roof. The barn creaked in the wind. Walt thought about his father. A quiet man, a farmer who'd worked this same land through the Depression, through droughts and floods and markets that crashed. A man who'd taught Walt that you measured your worth not by what you owned, but by how you treated people when nobody was watching. His father had died with almost nothing, just this farm and a reputation for fairness, and every man in the county had come to his funeral. Walt lifted his head. He looked at the soil jars, at his handwriting, at the proof of his own meticulousness, his own careful attention to the land and the people who worked it. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about whether the old ways still mattered, whether a man's word meant something, whether kindness was strength or weakness. Walt stood up. He knew what he had to do. It would cost him the farm, would cost him his marriage, though that was already gone. He just hadn't admitted it yet. Would cost him his pride, but it wouldn't cost him his integrity. And at 67, that was all he had left that mattered. He grabbed his jacket, walked out into the rain. Sarah's car was in the driveway when he got back to the house. Lights on in the kitchen. He'd forgotten she was coming tonight, not tomorrow morning. He walked inside. She was at the table, surrounded by papers, legal documents, county records, loan files. She looked up. Her face was older than he remembered. 38 now. She had Emma's eyes. "Dad," she said, "I've been going through everything. Craig's pattern is clear. 12 farms in 2 years, always the same. Insider information, lowball offers, quick flips. I can build a case, but it'll take time." "How long?" Walt asked. 6 months? Maybe longer. My loan's due in 5 weeks. Sarah's face fell. Then we file for an emergency injunction, freeze the foreclosure until— No, Walt said. Dad, I'm not fighting him in court. Walt sat down across from her. I'm fighting him where it matters, in front of people who knew my father, who know me, who know what a man's word used to mean. Sarah studied him. What are you going to do? Walt pulled out his phone, showed her Hank's photos, the soil jars, his handwriting, years of stolen data. I'm going to tell the truth, he said, and let the county decide who they believe. Sarah looked at the photos, then at him. Dad, that's not enough for a legal case. I don't need a legal case. Walt's voice was quiet, certain. I need witnesses. I need the feed mill bulletin board. I need every farmer in this county to know what Craig Hollister did, and I need them to know I'm not backing down. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, then she nodded. Okay, then let's make sure everyone knows. She pulled out her laptop, started typing, and Walt sat there, watching his daughter work, and felt something in his chest that he hadn't felt in 20 years. Hope. They arrived at the feed mill at 6 in the morning, Walt, Sarah, and Hank. The sky was just starting to lighten, gray and cold. April now. The air smelled like wet earth and diesel exhaust. Inside, the grain auger was already running, its whine filling the empty space. Walt carried a single sheet of paper. Sarah had helped him write it. Simple, direct, no legal language, just the truth. Public notice. Craig Hollister, Hollister Ag Finance, agricultural data theft and loan manipulation evidence, soil samples stolen from Walter Jennings' property, 2019-2024, used to identify and target distressed farms for below-market purchases, 12 families affected. Method: insider information obtained through office manager with access to private loan files and property records. Witness: Hank Mosley. Evidence photographed and documented. Contact: Walter Jennings, 319-555-0147. Walt pulled a pushpin from his pocket, the red kind, the kind that lasted. He pressed the notice into the corkboard, center position, right above the grain prices. The sound of the pin going in was small, final. Hank stood beside him. That's it then. That's it, Walt said. Sarah took a photo with her phone. For the record, she said. By 7 o'clock, the first farmers started arriving. Tom Wheeler, Gene Tidwell's son, the Morrison boy, back from college. They stood in front of the board, reading. Not saying much, just reading. By 8, there were 15 men crowded around, voices rising, phones coming out. By 9, Craig's phone was ringing off the hook. Walt didn't stay to watch. He drove home, Sarah following in her car. The hard part was done. Now they waited. Craig showed up at the farm at noon. Walt was in the barn, working on the seed planter. He heard the Range Rover before he saw it. That expensive engine sound. Heavy tires on gravel. Craig walked into the barn like a man trying to control a fire. His face was red. His suit jacket was gone, sleeves rolled up. He looked like he'd been up all night. What the hell did you do? Craig's voice was tight, controlled, but barely. Walt set down his wrench, wiped his hands on a rag. Told the truth. You posted lies on a public board. That's slander. I'll sue you for everything. Craig stopped, laughed. It was a sharp, bitter sound. Oh wait, you don't have anything left. I already own it all. You own the debt, Walt said. Not the land. Not yet. 5 weeks, Craig said. That's all you've got left. And then I'm calling it due. Every penny. And when you can't pay, and you won't be able to pay, I'm taking this farm at auction. 40% below market, just like the others. Walt said nothing. You think your little bulletin board stunt matters? Craig stepped closer. You think anyone cares? I've already called my lawyers. By tomorrow, that notice comes down and you sign a retraction, or I file for immediate foreclosure. I've got enough leverage with the county to push it through. You stole my soil data, Walt said quietly. Prove it. I have photos, witnesses. Circumstantial. Craig's smile was cold. My word against yours. And guess whose word carries more weight, the successful businessman or the washed-up farmer who can't even keep his own wife interested? Walt's jaw tightened. Craig saw it, leaned in. Yeah, she told me you accused her, got all jealous and paranoid. Pathetic. He paused. You want to know the truth, Walt? She came to me, not the other way around. Said she was tired of living in a dead man's shadow, tired of watching you pine for your first wife, tired of this farm, and this town, and you. Walt's hands clenched. I didn't seduce her, Craig said. She was already looking for a way out. I just gave her one. The barn was quiet except for the wind outside, the smell of grease and old wood. Walt looked at Craig, really looked at him, saw the fear underneath the anger, saw a man who'd built everything on lies and leverage, and now the foundation was cracking. "You're scared," Walt said. Craig's face flickered. "I'm not. Your boss is auditing you. That's why you flew to Chicago. That's why you're here, threatening me instead of just letting your lawyers handle it." Walt's voice was steady, calm. "You're scared because 12 families means a pattern, and patterns mean federal investigation, and you can't buy your way out of that." Craig's jaw worked. "You don't know what you're talking about. I know you left evidence in your truck. I know you got sloppy because you thought I was too old and too stupid to fight back." Walt stepped closer. "I know your firm's about to drop you, and I know that bulletin board notice is going to be read by every farmer, every banker, every county official in this area by end of business today. They won't believe you. They already do." Craig stared at him. Then he turned and walked toward the door, stopped, looked back. "You saved my life," Craig said. His voice was different now, quieter. "I don't forget that. But business is business, Walt. You should have stayed out of it." "You made it personal when you stole from me," Walt said. "When you used my wife to destroy my neighbors." She knew what she was doing. Craig's smile came back, cruel. "Every file she showed me, every desperate farmer she told me about, she knew, and she did it anyway." He left. Walt stood there in the barn, listening to the Range Rover drive away. An hour later, Sarah came into the barn. Her face was serious. "Dad, you need to see this." She handed him her phone. "Email from Diane, sent to Walt's address an hour ago." Walt read it. Then he read it again. "Walt, I'm not coming back. I'm staying with my sister in Des Moines. I'll have a lawyer contact you about the divorce. I need you to know something. Craig and I were close. We were more than close. And yes, I helped him. I showed him loan files. I gave him access to your soil data. I told him which farmers were behind on payments. I told myself it was business, that I was just doing my job. But I knew what he was doing with the information. I knew, and I helped anyway. I thought he cared about me. I thought we were building something together. But I was wrong. He used me the same way he used everyone else. I'm sorry for what I did to you, to our neighbors, to people who trusted me. The files are in the kitchen, on the table, color-coded folders, every farm Craig bought, every loan he manipulated, all the proof you need. I know you won't forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness, but maybe this helps." Diane Walt lowered the phone. Sarah was watching him. "Dad?" "She left the files," he said. "I know. I already photographed them, every page." Sarah's voice was careful. "This changes everything. With her confession and the documentation, we have a real case. I can file it today. Emergency injunction, fraud charges, the whole thing." Walt walked to the barn door, looked out at the fields. The mud was drying. Spring planting season coming, if he still had a farm to plant. "Do it," he said. Sarah nodded, started making calls. Walt stood there watching the clouds break apart, sunlight coming through in patches. Diane had betrayed him, had helped Craig destroy their neighbors, had chosen greed over integrity. But in the end, she'd chosen truth over loyalty to Craig. It didn't fix what she'd done, didn't make him forgive her, but it gave him a weapon. And sometimes that's all a man needed. The news hit the county like a late frost. By the next morning, Craig's boss from Chicago was back. By afternoon, Hollister Ag Finance had a closed for business sign on the door. By evening, 3 lawyers had filed motions on behalf of the 12 families Sarah had identified. Walt heard most of it from Hank, who heard it from Lyle at the bank, who heard it from the county clerk, who heard it from Reverend Opal. Small towns worked like that. Information flowed through the feed mill and the church and the hardware store faster than any newspaper could print it. Craig's firm lost its agricultural lending license. State investigation pending. The 12 farm loans were transferred to a regional bank, Lyle's Bank, with modified terms. No foreclosures, fair interest rates, actual human beings answering the phones. Craig tried to sell his house. Nobody would buy it, not at any price. Within a week, he was gone. No goodbye, no forwarding address, just gone. Hank said he heard Craig was selling insurance in Omaha now. Somebody else said Kansas City. Nobody knew for sure. Nobody cared. Walt sat at Hank's counter on a Tuesday morning in early May, drinking coffee. The grain auger hummed overhead, the smell of diesel and feed dust, the wood floor worn smooth by 70 years of boots. "You won," Hank said. Walt wrapped his hands around the mug. The coffee was bitter, strong, perfect. "Did I?" Craig's gone. Firms shut down. Families got their loans back. Hank leaned on the counter. That's winning, Walt. Lost my wife. You lost her a long time ago. Just didn't know it yet. Walt nodded slowly. That was true. Diane had been gone for years. He'd just been too stubborn or too lonely to see it. Kept the farm, though, Hank continued. Lyle refinanced your loan, fixed rate, 20 years, said your soil data alone was worth the risk. He smiled. Turns out being meticulous pays off. Walt took a sip of coffee, looked at the bulletin board across the room. His notice was still there, faded now but still pinned, the red pushpin bright against the cork. Somebody had written under it in marker, "Thank you, Walt." He didn't know who, didn't need to know. Sarah's staying? Hank asked. For now, she's helping me get the planning done. Says she wants to learn the business. Walt's voice softened. 20 years I pushed her away, and she came back anyway. That's what family does. Yeah. Walt stared into his coffee. Yeah, it is. That afternoon, Walt and Sarah planted the north field. The sun was warm on Walt's back, the smell of fresh-turned earth, diesel exhaust, seed corn rattling in the planter. The tractor's engine hummed, steady, reliable, the sound of spring. Sarah drove. Walt rode beside her, teaching her the old way, how to watch the depth, how to feel the soil's moisture through the machine's pull, how to know when the land was ready. She was a quick learner. Had her mother's focus, Emma's focus. Why'd you really come back? Walt asked over the engine noise. Sarah didn't look at him, kept her eyes on the field. Because you asked. I didn't ask, you offered. You didn't hang up. She glanced at him. That's close enough. Walt smiled. First real smile in months. They planted until sunset. The field stretched out behind them in straight rows. Perfect rows, the way Walt's father had taught him, the way he was teaching Sarah now. When they finished, Sarah shut off the tractor. The sudden silence was enormous. Just the wind through the empty corn rows, the distant sound of crows. Dad, Sarah said, you know you're going to be okay, right? Walt looked at her. I know. You did the right thing, standing up, even when it cost you everything. Didn't cost everything, Walt said quietly. Got you back. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She looked away, wiping them with the back of her hand. You're going to make me cry, old man. You've earned it. They sat there in the tractor cab as the sun set, orange and pink light spilling across the fields, the smell of warm soil and possibility. Walt thought about Craig, about Diane, about 47 years of work nearly lost because he'd saved a man's life. But he'd do it again. That was the thing Craig would never understand. Walt would still pull him from that ditch, would still help Ed fix his tractor, would still collect soil samples and share data and help neighbors because that's what neighbors did. The old way wasn't outdated. It was just harder. A week later, the spring planting permit arrived in the mail. Walt opened the envelope at the kitchen table. Official county seal, signed and approved, no delays, no complications. He set it on the table next to a drawing Sarah had made when she was 7. He'd found it in a box in the attic, crayon picture of the farm, the barn, the house, the fields. 2 stick figures labeled Dad and Me. He'd kept it all these years, even when he'd pushed her away, even when he'd convinced himself he didn't need anyone. Walt pressed the permit flat with his palm. 47 years of dirt under his nails, 20 years of grief, 8 years of a broken marriage, 5 weeks of fighting for what was right, and here he was, still standing, still farming, still himself. Outside, Sarah's car pulled into the driveway. She'd gone into town for supplies, seeds and fertilizer and hope. Walt stood up, looked out the window at the fields. Green shoots were starting to show in the North 40. Tiny, fragile, determined. Life pushing through soil, the way it always did, the way it always would. He heard Sarah come through the door. Dad, you want coffee? Yeah, he called back. I'll be right there. But he stood at the window a moment longer, watching the fields, watching the spring light turn everything gold. His farm, his land, his legacy. Not because Craig had failed to take it, but because Walt had refused to let it go. And that, he thought, made all the difference. Now, I'm not going to tell you Walt lived happily ever after. That's not how life works in farm country. Diane never came back. Last anyone heard, she'd moved to Des Moines, got a job at an insurance company, kept her head down. Some folks said she was seeing a therapist. Others said she'd joined a church group. Walt didn't ask, didn't need to know. The divorce papers came in June. He signed them without reading past the first page. What was done was done. Craig left town the way men like him always do, quietly in the middle of the night, leaving debts and broken promises behind. Someone said Omaha. Someone else said he'd gone back east. Walt figured it didn't matter. Men like Craig always landed somewhere, always found new people to use. But this time, there'd be a paper trail. Sarah made sure of that. Filed reports with the State Agricultural Board, the Banking Commission, the county prosecutor. 12 families got their justice. Not in a courtroom, necessarily, but in spreadsheets and settlements and loan modifications that gave them breathing room. Sometimes that's what justice looks like. Quiet, boring, paperwork signed in bank offices instead of dramatic courtroom speeches. The 12 families kept farming. Some of them stopped by Walt's place that summer to say thank you, brought pie, or helped with haying, or just sat on the porch and drank iced tea and didn't say much of anything. That's how it worked in farm country. Gratitude wasn't a speech, it was presence. Last time I saw Walt, it was late May of the following year. He was out in the back 40 with Sarah, checking soil samples. Same ritual he'd been doing for 48 years now. Soil jar in one hand, notebook in the other. His handwriting still clear and steady. Sarah was taking her own samples now, learning the trade. She'd cut her hours at the law firm, came out weekends and some weekdays. Said she was thinking about moving back permanent, maybe take over the farm when Walt was ready to retire. Walt told her he'd be ready to retire when he was dead. She'd laughed, said that's what she figured. The corn was knee-high, right on schedule. Barn swallows had built nests in the rafters again, swooping in and out through the open doors. The air smelled like warm earth and growing things. That green smell of late spring, the smell of life insisting on itself. Walt's hair was whiter than it had been a year ago, his hands shakier, but his eyes were clear. And when he smiled, which he did more often now, it reached all the way up. He didn't get his wife back, didn't get his $40,000 back. The farm was smaller now, some acreage sold off to make the numbers work. He'd never be rich, would probably work until the day he died. But he got something better than money, something Craig Hollister would never understand no matter how many farms he bought or how many suits he wore. He got to look himself in the mirror every morning and know he didn't bend. Know he stood up when it mattered. Know he chose people over profit, integrity over comfort, truth over silence. And in a world that's always asking you to compromise, asking you to stay quiet, asking you to look the other way, that's worth more than any loan a man could ever pay off. Some men measure their worth by what they own. Walt measured his by what he refused to surrender. And at 68 years old, with dirt still under his nails and his daughter finally home, he figured he'd made the right choice. The land would remember. The neighbors would remember. And when the time came, years from now, God willing, they'd gather at his funeral the way they'd gathered at his father's. Not because he was rich, not because he was powerful, but because he was good. And good, it turns out, lasts longer than anything else.